Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on this fourth session of designing and creating FUI. And welcome Elly, Chad, and Nick. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hello.
So, and hi to our regular viewers. Hi, Isaac, Logan, Pedro, Kent, Sharon, and Jay, and Anders. And Anders is just typing in the questions. He's got a spoiler alert talking about a Redshift series that we've got coming up. So yes, this is the spoiler alert, the stuff that I'm showing on the screen. But we are definitely going to be doing an hour's worth, maybe slightly more, of content this morning. But we've got so much new training material that I have to just spend a few minutes just telling you all about it. So I'll try and be quick because as regular listeners and viewers will know that this is the bit where I say, hey, don't forget our other things that are happening. But this week, we seem to have loads of things kicking off. So I'll be quick, but essentially, all you need to do is just to go to the Maxon events page. Here it is, maxon.net, and go to events, and then you can see all this stuff. This is the page that I'm sharing. So as David says, more fun, absolutely, yes. So as well as going through this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you're at, the tracking and compositing elements that you've made or the FUI elements that you've made to track and composite, we have a whole bunch of things turning up, including this thing here, Hands-On with Maxon. This is a new series that we are doing, which is a slower series. And lots of people have been asking us questions, which you can do, training@maxon.net, and making suggestions about what you'd like to see. And so this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do all sorts of different styles of sessions so that the ones that we do in the demystifying are kind of inspirational, or we hope that we're covering lots of things to get you thinking about stuff. But the Hands-On with Maxon series is designed just to take you through a whole process, and you can follow along, and we provide the project files as well. So this one, Hands-On with Maxon, we're starting off, is a beginner's guide to Cinema 4D. And this is Elly and Matt taking you through that 6-week series, and these are 2-hour sessions. So if you do click on this button, here we go, it tells you Hands-On Maxon and shows you what you're going to go through on each particular week. So week 1, getting started. Just taking you right back to the basics, but the whole point is to get you comfortable within cinema in 6 weeks. That's right. What have I left out about that, Elly?
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah, all through like the basics, like MoGraph, dynamics, all the fun, cool stuff. But yeah, a good kind of follow along pace.
Absolutely, and this is in answer to many requests and questions we've had for doing exactly this. So the other thing is, if you do hit the register now button, it takes you to the webinar page. And I just wanted to point out this, that you can download the project files. So you can do this in advance of the series. And that means that not only are the project files there, but it's a list in a document about all the topics that we're going to go through for the 6 weeks or so. And that starts next week. So that starts on Wednesday, the 2nd of June. So check that out. And we'll put all this stuff, you can see it now in the links on the website, but we'll put comments about it in the descriptions area if you're watching the recording on YouTube. And by the way, yes, we do record all of these sessions. If you are wanting to see any of our previous sessions on the webinars for over the last year or more, please go to YouTube and search for Maxon Training Team, and then you'll find us there. And Andrew's asking, will there be some techniques for lights, so C4D light in After Effects in the 6 weeks? And that's because this is an interactive process that we can absolutely talk about. I'm suggesting something that you already know what you're doing, Elly, but there's room for C4D light in there, isn't there?
Yeah, so weeks 1 and 2, and maybe a bit of 3 will be absolutely fine for light. But when it comes to things like dynamics and then MoGraph, unfortunately, they're not fully included in light. But yeah, and then week 6 is rendering, so always useful stuff to know, whether it's light or whether it's the full version.
And there's workflows to and fro, and even if you're going from the full version of Cinema 4D, there's some things that you can then pass over back to light if you need to do that in a production environment. And the whole point about these is that they're live, so you can ask those questions and you can have discussions about it. So And as TJ is saying, you don't have to be a beginner, but you can have gaps in your knowledge, which is going to be really useful for. So, and Jonathan says it's going to be very useful as well for all of the students at Nottingham Trent University. So we're glad this is resonating with you. And we're extra glad because we've got lots more of them coming. So as well as these 6 weeks for hands-on with Maxon Cinema 4D, we've got what is a particle. So this is, where is the, oh, here it is. So particles in Cinema 4D and After Effects and also in Trapcode. And this is our very good friends, Chad and Nick, who are putting this together. Yay.
Yay.
So, woohoo. So we have more of your time, which is fantastic. And this is another series. This is another 6 weeks of 2-hour sessions, which is follow along, and you get the project files as well. And you also get to ask questions about different workflows. Anything else whilst I've got you guys that you wanted to throw in with that description?
We may have some special guests along the way.
Yes.
We do. We actually do have some special guests along the way.
Absolutely, and that's the whole plan. And those, same thing, if you click on registration, you get the full list of what's happening with that. And there's even more stuff coming as well. So for next month, we're moving from the FUI designs into doing a whole month on Redshift. And we are kicking off with Redshift materials. In fact, it's Redshift materials and rendering is the theme. This is an answer to some of the requests, and it includes procedural materials as well as the materials within Redshift, and then also working with hair and then how to render those and render more quickly. And we have Jonas and Darren and Lionel VC Domini, who are experts, as well as Elly. And anything else we want to say about Redshift stuff we're doing all during June, Elly?
You've kind of covered it all. And then like the really fun week 4, where we're kind of collabing on a Redshift every day, the 4 trainers in the hour session, which is going to be fun and challenging, but should be good fun.
That's yes. How did I forget that? Yes, all those techniques in the first 3 weeks we're going to put together and do that and build up a live Redshift project from scratch in 1 hour, and so it's going to be really interesting. So that's going to be super fun. And also, there's so much stuff. I'm sorry about all this. We'll jump into the FUI stuff in 60 seconds or so. But one other key thing is that this is the page for finding about all about events too. So as well as the 3D motion show that we have every month, as you know, with amazing artists showing how they did amazing designs, we also have shows like there's one in Russia later on this week, the CG event, and also there's a Japanese event in Japanese about the new version of Particular. So this is where we're posting a lot of stuff for many different territories, and we do trainings in many different languages these days. Then finally, this is by no means not the least, we have the Ask the Trainer sessions. And this week, we are delighted to welcome, oh, here we are, just click on this one, here we go. We're delighted to welcome back Thanasis, so or AKA Noseman, who is running a how to make tutorial session. And this is really interesting because he's got so much experience over the years, and it's the sort of things that I'd wished I'd known way back in the day when I first started making tutorials. So this is this Thursday, and he's also going to be covering a lot of the aspect of how to become a certified user, and in fact, a certified trainer in Cinema 4D. And he's hinting at some of these. If you go to the YouTube channel, you probably will have seen how to make tutorials. He's got a 5 tutorial series, like a meta series, tutorials about how to make tutorials, but all sorts of practical, pragmatic, and philosophical tips on that. So so please come along on Thursday to that. And I know I said finally, but there's always the one more thing. We also have, starting next week, we have the amazing Seth and Hashi are doing a weekly talk show, so 90 minutes on VFX stuff, where they are just breaking down their favorite VFX of the week and saying, well, how would we do that? And then just going through that process and seeing if they can make it work. And that's going to be a live session too. So there's just so much content that we're sharing with the different features. There's some slower hands-on, there's some more inspirational stuff, there's completely unstructured asking questions stuff too. So we thank you for all the requests and the questions, and these are directly in relation to the things that you've asked us to do. So we love your questions. Please keep sending them in, training@maxon.net. Great, and we've had a whole bunch of questions and talking about these things as well as been droning on. So thank you all for the really nice comments and the enthusiasm. So that it really is fantastic. And any link, we'll go through that in a second, whilst we run through the different presentations that we've got for you right now, and we'll answer those questions on the side too. Great. Whoa, that's 10 minutes of preamble. I think that's a record, isn't it? That's crazy. So back to today. What are we doing today? We are doing today, if I go back to the events page, here we go. We are doing the fourth series in demystifying post-production with FUI graphics and compositing and incorporating those into scenes. So, oh yes, just quickly. Oh, there's always one more thing. Some of the stuff I've been talking about is in the handout. So if you go to the handout section of this very webinar software, you'll see a PDF, which has got a link for many of the things we're talking about, including this one here, the project file downloads, because this includes the project files from all the FUI sessions this month, and also some of the ones that we're showing right now. So talking of showing right now, I should do that, shouldn't I? So let me hand over the screen to you, Chad. Here we go.
All righty.
So make you a presenter. And
it's going to take more than this webinar software to make me a presenter, but yeah.
And as Isaac is saying, how many one more things did you have? More than Columbo.
7 one more things. Are y'all seeing my screen?
We are indeed.
Oh, okay. All right. So I was talking to Simon last time, or after last week, and he was mentioning that some people, work in Premiere, do a lot of work in Premiere, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I thought, like, oh, I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna rebel against the system, protest, and create some UI stuff in Premiere. And also, what I wanted to do is to create a composite in Premiere, because I got me thinking of like, well, what? I mean, if I had to work in Premiere, I think some people, you kind of are limited in your workflow sometimes by wherever you're working, whatever they're doing. So sometimes you have to kind of be flexible and do things in other software tools, whatever. So I thought, what can I do if I only had to use Premiere? And After Effects is my bread and butter. I've been doing it for 20 years, and so like I naturally gravitate to do everything in After Effects. I'd probably edit in After Effects before I'd composite in Premiere. But then I thought, what if I had to? So this is what I came up with, and this is green screen footage, and everything here was done in Premiere except for the track. That was an interesting thing. I couldn't figure out how to do any tracking with any tool in Premiere, which is kind of interesting. Also, just a quick little pause aside, I also was playing around with DaVinci Resolve, and I was like, I know that Universe, which we're going to be looking at here to create some UI stuff, also exists in DaVinci Resolve. And so if you're interested in setting that up, you can go to the edit page in a sequence, and then you go to the effects library, and then you can open up the, is it Open Effects? No, I thought it was Toolbox. Yeah, Toolbox, and then we can go to generators, and then we can drag a solid color clip in, or we can go to effects and bring in a fusion composition or an adjustment clip, and you could apply effects to all of these. And if you go to, like, if I double click the fusion composition, it'll open, or if I go to the fusion page, then I can adjust this in Fusion. And I totally know how to do this in Fusion, but I'm not going to show you that for a reason that's different than that. I'm going to go to the color page, and then we have here the adjustment clip and the solid color. And what we can do here is open up our Open Effects and go to the library. And then if we scroll down, if you have Universe installed, then you'll see towards the bottom here all of the universe effects. So here's universe motion graphics, there's HUD components, and I can apply this and I can have these effects going in DaVinci Resolve as well. So again, that's all we're going to look at for DaVinci Resolve, but just be aware that that is possible, which is really helpful sometimes because you need extra effects to bail you out of situations sometimes in Resolve. Anyways, let me show you this really quick. This is what I started with here. This is the footage. So this is the raw red footage. And so I keyed that out using Primat Keyer, and I composited it. Let's see if I can go to this other comp here. Let's go to effect control. I got a lot of effects on this thing. Here we go. So yeah, so I have Primat Keyer 6, and then I have 3 different lumetries to composite this better into the background. Got an optical glow to kind of make these highlights bloom a little bit. And then this was a lot for Premiere to handle. So I added some renoiser adjustment layer on the top to add some noise in from the Magic Bullet suite. And then that's where we have this thing. So then I created a black video layer and applied HUD components. And I felt, you know, this really would be like, I would feel bad if we left this month without talking a little bit more about HUD components. I know I mentioned it in like week 2, but I just want to go through this very briefly to talk about what you can do, because HUD components, you know, has basically 4 elements that you can use, and you open it up and the default settings are this arc thing. So, you know, you look around element type and then you have this huge long list of presets. So we have like locator 2, or we have a circle outline, or a fingerprint. And so we have some interesting objects, but it creates this this idea that, you know, that's all that this is this is just a kind of like a preset thing. And one of my beefs with HUD components is that it kind of buries the lead a little bit. This arc thing right here is kind of unassuming, you know, it's in a list of a long list of tools. And so it seems like all the other ones where it's just kind of like this pre-made shape, but it's not. If I click on arc, it just makes a circle. So again, it's very unassuming. But if you're choosing an arc, then you have all kinds of options that aren't available. So I can go up to arc options, for example, and I can take down the segment angle so I'm not drawing a full arc. Now you might be saying, that's not very impressive at all. And I would say, okay, just calm down for a second. And then what I can do here is with this little half circle, go into clones, which is interesting, you know, and let's say I'll give it 10 clones, and there's nothing that happens there just yet. So again, it leads people to be like, I don't know if this is for me. But what I can do is go to clone radius offset, and then increase this, and then we start offsetting those clones, and we start having something that's a little bit more interesting. And then what I can do here is I can go into randomness and go into random Z rotation. And what that's going to do is it's going to access the random Z rotation of the clones. So as I increase this, look at that. That's kind of fun, right? So there you have it. And then what I could do is I could go into the animation area. And this is why this is great even for Premiere, because there's all these different built-in animations. So I could have this blink or flicker or wiggle scale or wiggle a bunch of different things, oscillate, whatever. And so I could bring more complex animation here into Premiere without, you know, having to deal with animation in Premiere, which, you know, isn't always the greatest thing. So I could choose Wiggle Orbit 2D here, and that wiggles the whole thing. But then I can go into the clones, and I can go to clone time offset. I'll take this to 0.1. And now look at this. We got this, like, you know, this cool motion where all these little clones are moving around independently. It's a little bit too fast for me. So I'm going to go back up into the animation here, take down the animation speed to like 0.2, and there we have this kind of like interesting deal here. Now what I can do here is then go in and add another element, which is what I did. I added like another like simple shape to the inside. I'll skip that for now for time, and I'm going to go to element 2. I'm going to add another element. I'll change the color on that. Well, let me just make another arc really quick. I'll change the color to out of love for Simon here, we'll make this orange. And then what I can do here, go back to arc options, and I'm gonna take down the segment angle to be very small here. And actually, let me go to transform, make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, let's make it smaller, just for right now. And then I can take down the segment angle to something very tiny here, like that. See a little tiny little beep. And then what I can do is go into my clones, make a bunch of clones. Can't see them right now. I'll go into clone Z rotation, and then look at that. Then we can, pull this around in a circle, and then we could have these kind of like dots around the outside. We could have, less of them with like the clones. We could grow them on like this. We could also, when we have these clones, we could increase like the stroke width and make these kind of like bands like this. And so we have a lot of flexibility that's not really super apparent right away when we're using this. And also, if you're going to like kind of blend it into footage, if you go to element 1, because by default everything is linked to element 1, which is really helpful because I can go back to element 1's transform, and then I can move this around to kind of like composite it, and the whole thing composite, so I could like scale it down, make it look like it's in like the right spot or whatever. And there you have it. So this is the final thing that I came up with. And let's see, I turned off the background so I could render this out. But I also added holomatrix from Universe to give it this kind of like, I don't know, LCD broadcast type thing. I wasn't super happy with it. I should have fiddled with it longer so I could have been more proud of it, but it gets the point across that you can do that. But one of the things that I thought was pretty cool is that I applied optical glow, which is like one of my favorite effects. But then in the latest update for optical glow, they have this radiate setting, which is kind of like a trap code shine. It kind of makes the light rays radiate out. And so I increased that all the way up to 100%. It creates this, very gentle effect. Like shine, you can create these like really like light rays, and they're very obvious light rays, but the effect with radiate here is much more subtle. So then I put the radiate center at the top so that the radiation glow would kind of come from like go towards the bottom to kind of create the look that like light rays are kind of like going up to make this thing. And then we have this deal. Oh, one last thing, just really quick. So to track this, I use one of my favorite tracking tricks, which is like not always that obvious, but I went in and I used the spot clone tracker. And the spot clone tracker is a phenomenal effect that is great for cleaning up footage. So if you have an object in your scene, you can like use spot clone tracker to track that object and then patch it from some other place in the scene. But the thing is, the tracker in spot clone tracker is really fast and it's really accurate. And you also don't have to, it's kind of like a point tracker that's like way better than a point tracker, like especially the point tracker in After Effects. So when I did the spot clone tracker here, I just made this kind of like big area, and you can just kind of like move this around and be like, I kind of want like this type of thing. So I tracked the little like glint on the side of her compact right here, and then you hit the play button and it tracks it. And what's really cool is that then I now have the center of this spot with keyframes. So I use this data from spot clone tracker to make a null and then track the this UI element to it. As you can see here, there's that. But I didn't actually use the spot clone tracker at all. I just used the tracking function to get tracking data, and then I used this null. I parented it to this null, so then the null used that tracking data. So spot clone tracker only for the tracker, not the spot or the cloning, just the tracker, which I think again is a much more helpful thing. And then that's my final result. And I'm 6 minutes and 13 seconds over. I apologize. Turn it back over to you.
No, it's all right. In fact, it's not your fault, Chad. It's entirely my fault for sharing too much stuff at the beginning. But this is interesting because that's a really nice trick about using spot clone for not using it, for just getting the data out the scene, because it's such a fast way to track those elements in the frame.
Yeah, and with After Effects, you have to have like a point, and then if you have like too much contrast or noise or whatever, it goes out of sync or whatever. And then if you have like a planar tracker, then you have to like make sure you have like a big surface. And I don't know, spot clone tracker, you can just be like, I don't know, it's somewhere in this area, just go, and then it does it. It's really quick and fast. I love it.
It's also related in terms of the speed of doing things. Jonathan had a great question, which is related to this, because a lot of the Red Giant tools are designed to do this, especially if you're working quickly. And he was saying the HUD components inside Universe, well, these work on an average Mac, because is it dependent on graphics card and needing external graphic card or breakout box to make it work? The quick answer is no, because they are GPU accelerated, and it's OpenCL on the Mac, and it's whatever. In fact, it's OpenCL on Windows, and it will piggyback off whatever card you've got. But they're deliberately set to not be heavy to process, because they're effectively 2D effects, although you can make them look 3D, as Chad has here. But what would be your experience, both Chad and Nick, about that particular working on different types of Macs or PCs, different types of power, if you like, of various computers with Universe HUD?
My last computer like a year ago was a 2012 Mac Pro cheese grater that had like a 1080 Ti like NVIDIA card in it, and like it was fine. And like I'm on a PC now, but it's not like a tricked out magical PC that people would drool over. It's just like a one I got on Amazon, you know, it's like whatever, and it's fine. If you start having like all four of those elements, and they're all doing stuff, and then you start adding additional effects like you're compositing and glowing, and you start kind of like piling those on. In Premiere especially, it slowed down when I had all that stuff going on, plus Hollow Matrix, plus Renoiser, plus yada yada. It can slow down a little bit, but yeah.
And when you've got to lay them on top of each other, exactly.
Yeah, but like just using the effect or whatever, it's like I mean, you saw, I mean, I'm in Premiere, which is notoriously bad for like rendering cool effects, and those little like clone thingies that were going on with all the little doohickeys, like that was like I'm scrubbing this, and it's like playing in like real time with those two layers and all of these clones and like all that kind of stuff. So it's like not even close to slowing down yet.
So interesting that you've been doing this in Premiere and also in Resolve, because we see that a lot of the time when we're talking to broadcasters, for example, they want to set up graphics on the timeline, whether it becomes the final thing or whether they're just then handing that over to the graphics department. And so the ability to do that without having to jump in around different hosts is super useful, especially for iterations.
Yeah, pretty cool. I never thought like, oh, I could do a composite and UI design. Like everything that I did was in Premiere, except for the tracking. Every single thing of this whole deal was all the effects, compositing, the color, the green screening, everything. And so I was surprised by what I was able to do in just Premiere. It's fun.
I have to ask you, Nick, because you've done whole courses on Universe. What would be your take on the flexibility of HUD or the speed?
It's amazing. I think, Chad, you touched upon like all of the amazing benefits of HUD components, but in performance, I have a MacBook Pro. One has 16 gigabytes of RAM and a modern day AMD card from 2015. The experience is fantastic in Premiere. I think, Chad, you said it eloquently, where if you have one or two HUD component effects on a solid, like a black solid, or you just basically have it overwrite your footage, it works pretty great. When you get down to like anything where you have 3 or 4 effects, you're going to experience some performance issues. The only thing I would mention is if you're using After Effects as a gateway and you decide to do some sort of dynamic link workflow, I would highly recommend that you bake the clip inside of Premiere to gain better performance. And then, of course, you could always still go back to After Effects and change your dynamic link and then bake again so that you have good performance. I haven't had the best performance just in general whenever reading an After Effects composition in a Premiere timeline. It is something that I do not like. So I always try to bake out as much as possible, even temporarily, to gain some real-time performance with Premiere.
Cool. One quick question before we jump over to you, Nick. Isaac is asking about the tracking functionality in Spot Clone, and is it possible? Here we go. The reading and speaking is not my most highly skilled moment. So okay, I'll just read it. If the tracker functionality is performing much better than the built-in tracker, could it be possible that the tracker in Spot Clone could be made into a standalone effect tool which has some more specific tracking specific functions? That's an interesting suggestion, actually. I mean, you showed exactly how to do that with Chad by taking those keyframes and then parenting them to the null. But I wouldn't say in a battle of trackers, the performing better than the built-in tracker. We certainly found it faster, and also we don't have to do the individual points because it's sampling multiple different points at the same time. So you can kind of just throw it on and then test it out. That's really the process for it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that wasn't a question, Chad, was it?
Well, I don't. I feel like I don't know if I could answer if it should be broken out into a separate thing. That feels like a Red Giant question. But I mean, I think I for what it does, it's pretty cool. I could see it being beneficial to break off and have its own like tracking thing. But I feel like if Red Giant did make it like a purely tracking tool, I feel like it would be pretty sexy. But I don't want to. I'm not going to speak for Red Giant. But as a user, I think that would be a cool thing.
That's interesting. Okay, mark that one down as feature request, Isaac. We'll chat to the team. Actually, that'd be really interesting. Cool, great. So, shall I hand over the screen to Nick? Let's do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Please hand it over to me. It's actually a really good lead-in from what Chad showed, because I'm showing a few of similar workflows in terms of some green screens with my first example here. And also just some of the pain that I experienced in choosing a stock clip. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. So I have two examples to show. One example is actually of a green screen clip that I picked off ArtGrid. And I picked it for a reason because I knew that it would be problematic in some ways and just wanted to sort of problem solve how I could try to work with this inside of After Effects, not knowing what I would end up with. So I want to show this clip first of all. And Chad, if I'm correct, you're a member of the VFX Society. So I'm really curious your take, as well as Simon's and Elly's, on the tracking markers in this shot. So just take a look at this shot and we can go to the final example in a second, but this is what I grabbed. And I'm just gonna play it back. It's a nice simple camera pan across the room with a little bit of scale in movement across the track, but you'll notice the green screen plates on the computer. I just want to also pay attention to the general hues in the room and these decided blue tracking markers. So yeah, Chad, I was curious to know your thoughts on these blue tracking markers, of what you think about them.
I feel like that's an interesting choice. I don't know why you would do that.
Sitting on the fence there. Are they insane? What are they doing?
But I mean, also sometimes you see something weird like that. It's just like, it could be me. Am I a dummy? Like, is there a reason that I don't know of? And somebody could be like, oh, don't you know that blue tracking markers, blah, blah, blah. And like, maybe it's just my ignorance. That's not a choice I would make, but I don't know why you would do that.
We also been having an internal discussion about orange tracking markers on green screens. And we get it. If there's not enough detail in a particular screen or a subject, then you will lose the track. And so that's one of the reasons, and also getting parallax and tracking objects into scenes, of course. But it seemed to, on a number of shots we were working on a project, it seemed to be the thing that everyone did. You just like put on those markers, and then you spent as much time getting rid of them as you did for actually then using them. And in many cases, you don't need to use them, especially if the movement in the rest of the shot is enough to hold a track on. So that it's an interesting one. It seems to be very popular, but our default position, kind of when we're talking about it for new sessions, would be just to have the green screen. Obviously, it's shot dependent, but we would try and avoid them. Especially blue and green. Blue, how was this in a blue scene when you were trying to key out blue tracking marks, Nick?
Yeah, so I kind of saw this and I'm like, I got to try this out. Just, I don't know why I was a glutton for punishment. Maybe it was just like a long Sunday. And also just, you'll notice that the the walls flickering, it kind of almost looks like they use screen text from Universe, which could be problematic towards the track, the blinking room. So maybe that was the reason for the track, but I can't quite get the choice of contrast with the blue and green tracking markers. Anyhow, I downloaded this clip, and my time spent on this, while not perfect by any means, was 3 hours. And I ended up with this composite, and I thought I would just talk about some of the tools I used with the workflow. In fact, I don't have yet. No, I have the proxy enabled. But if we go throughout the clip, I actually tracked 5 HUD screens to here. And I have a few different rendered versions, which are even better in terms of the actual track itself, and then tried to integrate these shots into it. So I thought before we get into the full build, I would just kind of go into the shot, and we could take a look at that composite a bit and what I used in order to tackle this. So let me zoom out, and let's kind of take a look at this. So my first thing was to make sure that I could key this out with Primat Key, or at least the green. And it did a fantastic job for the majority of the actual key. So if you haven't used Primat Key, and by the way, Chad, I think you, in terms of Premiere, you'll agree with me. This is like the one keyer to go to. Premiere's Ultra Key won't handle green screens as well. And in After Effects, where you have key light, and there are some benefits to it, I find keying with Primat Keyer to be way more simplistic for the majority of jobs I've done. And in many cases, in the past, I've strayed away from, if we go to the define key section here, auto keyers, because they haven't worked well. But there have been like a great handful of times where I've clicked this button and 60% of the job was done for me, which is just amazing. Even on difficult examples where you're handling edges in a specific shot. So I did use the auto-define key, and I did a pretty good job, but I had to do some cleanup after. And the great news about the cleanup is that you could just hop into one of 2 different sample styles. So one is to make a rectangular marquee selection around additional pixels that you either want to remove or keep in the shot. And the other is this crosshair selection, which allows you to kind of draw anywhere on the screen to make a selection of pixels. Now, you have 2 different paintbrushes. Green is to essentially remove pixels from the shot and create your alpha. And the other is to keep certain pixels with this white brush. And then we have refinement tools down here, which could help further with the cleanup, as well as dealing with the actual background. Now, there's a few other features of Primat Keyer which I love and are worth mentioning. One is the actual, if we go here to the view options, you have a built-in split screen display. So I'll just actually click that on and then just show you. Here's the actual matte you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, which we can choose the split screen amount without having to hop into another view. So that's really nice to have. And by the way, there's different functions you can choose to show on your right side, as well as there are different options you can choose to show here on the left side in this particular example. The other thing that I love about the keyer here is the fact of just enabling an awesome spill killer. And this happens in almost all cases, entirely has removed spill in a majority of green screen shots that I've worked on. So I really just love the fact that that's built in, and it does a pretty good job of removing the actual green, as you can see from the shot. Now, some of the hues from the actual clip got removed. I actually brought them back in using various effects, but it did a good job of at least removing the edges of the computer screen. Now, if I zoomed in, there was actually a little bit of residue, I'm going to call it residue, left over along the edges of the matte that I wanted you to see. And for that, I was thinking of using another version of Primat Keyer, potentially just enabling the spill suppression. But I just, in this case, relied on a preset advanced spill suppressor in After Effects to finalize the work on the edges. And then I had the joy of trying to work with these tracking markers, and this took up a majority of the time. And I tried a ton of different methods for the actual tracking markers on the screen that don't become obscured. Spot clone worked wonders. And even if they were partially obscured, I could do some very basic keyframing to change the shape of the spot clone and actually remove those tracking markers from the screen. So I did that 9 times to remove the majority of the tracking markers that you see here. And it did a really fast tracking job on each of them. And before I hopped to After Effects masks, which some of you might see here, I tried to use After Effects' cloning method, which is where you right-click a clip and open it as a layer. Then I used the cloning tool to, on the first frame of the shot, try to clone out a segment of the screen. And then similar to what Chad did, I tried to utilize some of the data, the position data from the spot clone to attach it to the position of the actual clone. And then I used the anchor point as a way to offset the clone. But in some cases, I experienced too much drift, and the edges on some of these still remain problematic. So then I went to masks and tried to do some as simple as possible masks. Some of these only had involved a 20 frame roto, but that's how I removed some of the other problematic masks here. And this is where it could use some additional work. So that was the first 2 steps of this. And then, to be honest, those tracking markers actually threw me off to the easiest solution for this actual track. So I tried to use a After Effects perspective corner pin. I actually even tried Kingpin Tracker, which worked on a few of these tracks. That's built into VFX Suite. But for the tracking markers that are obscured for the majority of the shot, it did become problematic to try to switch or reorient those points. And then after I took a look at the shot, after I had gotten up and grabbed myself a coffee at the time, I realized, oh, wow, it's just like a simple camera movement. So let me just try to throw After Effects' camera tracker and see what happens. And it worked wonders. To be honest, if we look at the view options here, just wondering if we can see, not sure why this is coming up here. I must have made a change to the default values of this by accident. Let's see if that was it. But it actually picked up on a bunch of tracking markers specifically on the screens. And I was able to draw planes out here with these targets. So if I hop back into the main composition, and I'll just disable my proxy here, you can see that from that tracking data, I right-clicked the first time and created a camera, and that camera contains all the tracking information. And then I produced a series of nulls on each of the screens, or as close as possible to the screens that were there. Okay, and you can see that it tracked pretty well in space if we followed these points.
It's
I then
interesting. Sorry, Nick. I just find it interesting that actually you found a better track after you removed the tracking markers, especially because there was enough movement of that camera in the shot.
Yeah, and it's in following the actual track, there were very few points that got produced on this blinking screen, which is fantastic, and it's probably because of the foreground detail here.
Often in some of these things, if you've got a lot of fast movement, it can put off the track. So in this shot, I noticed that you've got lots of fast moving text as kind of like a background, as if they're sitting in front of a massive screen. Did that throw off the track?
No, there was like 2 or 3 points that got picked up here, but no, it didn't. So in the past, sometimes that did come into play, and I have to say that it almost made the 3D camera tracker in After Effects unusable. In other cases where there's that sort of blinking effect, what's happened is I've had to remove tracking points from that section in order to have After Effects recalculate with the 3D camera tracker.
Interesting. I mean, the classic thing, of course, is to just mask out those sections if they're causing you a problem. But
Yeah,
nice that you didn't have to do effectively another series of masks on this. And how long did this whole shot take you, by the way, Nick?
I spent 3 hours on this.
Okay, that's
top to
another
bottom.
question we often get is, this is great to see a finished project, but actually how much effort is that? And is it worth me just jumping into it if I only got a few hours to work on it?
Yeah, and I would spend a lot more time, of course, to clear up some of the other elements inside this project. Now, after the track, just to continue, there was a bunch of pre-compositions that are in here, which contain the HUD elements that I used. In this case, I actually sourced some HUD elements from online, but in order to kind of integrate it into the shot, wanted to make a mention of a few effects built into After Effects that I used, and then a few from Universe. So the first one that I'm in love with is this effect called Color Link. And if you've never used it, while it is an 8-bit effect, you can have it reference the color of a shot in your composition. And whether it be from the effects and masks or just the source of that footage, it will sample that color and overlay those colors using a blend mode on top of your video clip. And what's great about this, if we look at this without a stenciled original, in fact, let me turn off these other effects when it calculates this. What we should see is that, let me turn up the opacity. You can see the max RGB values of this clip with the hackers in it. And the great part about this is that the lights, which are flashing in the room, also get picked up. So that's now overlaid on top of each of those video screens. Let me just undo those two controls. Now, on top of that, I added a match grain effect, referencing that clip as well, some blur, a hollow matrix effect at a very subtle opacity, and some optical glow on the screens, followed by a looks effect at the very top of this, and then an optical glow as well for the overall shot. The last part of this was the connecting the actual compositions here, or the pre-comps, where what I did was I dropped them into my composition. I made these all 3D, and then I shift-clicked and attached them to the nulls, which not only attaches it to these nulls produced by the 3D camera tracker, but moves it into the position of that null. And basically, the actual compositions took on the orientation of each of those screens, because I used 3 tracking points when I created those nulls. And it involved just some very simple scaling and a touch of repositioning versus trying to do that all from scratch. So that was that connection to the nulls to have it placed and moving there in the screen. And that was my adventures with that stock clip from online.
There's also, by the way, I added the link into the chat area. You can download and you can investigate Nick's project because he's kindly shared that with us. And it's a nice way of being able to just, is this the one that you shared? I think it is, Nick, isn't it?
I didn't share this one just because of the stock, music
Sorry.
clip.
Okay, in that case, strike that. I thought this was one of the shown. So it was a stock clip that you couldn't share. Okay, all right.
This is the stock clips that I cannot share, but I can send to you later, Simon, where you can grab these art grid clips,
Okay,
and
right.
actually even some of these HUD plates. So I grabbed those, but I don't have the rights to distribute them. But okay. Yeah, I have a link for each of those.
Would you be able to share the project without the clip and then the link to the clip, and so then you could just reconform it if you're in as an interested observer? That would work, wouldn't it?
I would be happy to share a link offline project, and that's the first time I've been asked to do such a thing.
Usually it's the other way around. Yes. Where's my clip?
Where's my clips? Yes, I would be happy to kind of share the tracking as well as the masks that are in here.
Cool.
I'm pretty much out of time. Oh my gosh, it's 12:50. So let me just stop there, because I know Elly has some stuff to show. And for any reason that we do have more time, I can show or share another example.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions in. Isaac, we've seen your question. That is for Chad, really, about masking and tracking inside Premiere. Chad, would you mind just jumping in on the questions and answering that for Isaac?
Sure.
Whilst Elly shows us tracking in C4D.
Cool. Right, can everyone see my screen?
We can do. The theme, just to rewind slightly for everyone, is that we were just looking at the typical challenges that we have and how you overcome those. And sometimes it's you can use, say, swap clone tracker, as Chad did, just to kind of sample a particular piece of data that you can then attach a null to. Or as Nick was showing, you can use the tracker inside After Effects. But Elly, you wanted to show us how you might approach tracking a certain effect if you were inside cinema, and why that would be a particular workflow.
Yeah, yeah, so I wanted to just kind of like scratch the surface of motion tracking and object tracking in C4D. So like, let's say you've made like your hologram or your 3D elements, or and you want to put those inside of your footage. I'm just going to show like really quickly how we can do that. And the final render is definitely not as cool as the guys. Like, it looks, theirs is super professional. Mine is some footage that I shot with my phone in my garden. But it's just to kind of demonstrate how we can do tracking inside cinema and how we can kind of add our 3D elements. So this is kind of what I ended up with. I just kind of took a shot of my hand in my garden and then tracked it inside cinema and then made this little like hologram thing. Yeah, so let's have a look at how we can kind of do that inside cinema. So in case people don't know, up in the top right, there is a layout drop down in Cinema 4D. So depending on the kind of stuff you're working on, you can actually choose the layout for that, as well as kind of, you know, customizing your own. So I've got my own user ones here. And the one we're going to be kind of going for is this motion tracker layout. And so what it's going to do, it's going to take away any of the stuff that it thinks you don't really need for motion tracking, and it's going to give you all the tools that you need to help you get started in motion tracking and object tracking. So we've got just our timeline at the bottom, and then we have these tools here, which we're going to kind of take advantage of now. And we have this kind of this new little window here, and it says double click to create empty object, and this is your motion tracking object. And that's what we're going to do first of all. We're going to double click and it's going to create our motion tracker. And if we drop that down, we then have our solved camera, which we're looking through, and it's got a little protection tag to stop us from moving around. And once we've done that, we then have another option to double click to select our footage. And so, as I said, I just went out and I went into my garden, like got my iPhone, and I shot kind of my hand with this little thing here, which I made using like a furniture like thing that goes underneath the foot. And I drew my points on it, and that's the thing in my hand that I was gonna like track into my hologram. So yeah, and then I turned that footage into a PNG sequence in After Effects. That's like the main thing, and that's what we're going to bring into cinema. So if I just open that, we have our footage now inside of Cinema 4D, and inside our motion tracker object, we have a couple of different tabs. The first tab we want to look at is this footage tab, and so we have our like file path here. So that's my like my iPhone PNG sequence. And then we have this resampling percentage, which by default is set to about 1/3. And the way to look at this is like the resolution of your footage. And so because mine was shot on an iPhone, I'm going to just kind of put that on 100%. So I have the clearest footage possible, which is going to help me when I track those points. And so now if I just sort of press play on my timeline, we can see kind of the footage that we have. Just sort of open my hand out, and I've got that little thing there that has got my points on, and they're the points that we're going to track manually. Cool. So right, first things first, I'm just going to trim my footage I'm going to start off at 90 frames because I've already done this. I know the kind of the start and end I want my footage. So I'm just going to have it so it doesn't kind of like appear or kind of disappear. We're just going to stick to kind of this bit here, so it's always in the shot. Cool. Right. So with that bit done, we can look at how we can manually track these points inside of Cinema. So you can, if we come to our 2D tracking tab, we have auto tracking and we have manual tracking. I'm only going to look at manual tracking today, but I've actually got a link to a YouTube tutorial that Jonas Pils did, and he went through a whole bunch of stuff in motion tracking. I think I've actually got it here. Yeah, so he went through a whole load of like tracking and object tracking stuff, and he really goes like into it in an hour and a half. So if you like what you see in the next 10 minutes, I'd recommend watching that, but we'll link to that as well. Cool, so what we're going to do, we're going to look at how we manually track these points. And so the important thing to mention is when it comes to then using object tracking and running what we call a 3D solver, it needs 9 points, needs 9 tracked points to do this. There are other ways. There are ways of using only a couple of points, so it's 3, and then we can do what's called geometry assisted tracking. But we're going to look at kind of this way today. And so what we can do, because inside our motion tracker layout, we have this 2D mode, so we can kind of quite easily move around our footage. We don't have to worry about rotating at all because we're just in 2D. And I'm going to track this point here, mainly because I know it isn't going to track it 100%. And that's what I want. I want it to mess up so I can show you guys what to do if it messes up. Because if it doesn't, then I've got nothing to show. So what we're going to do, we're going to command and we're going to click. And what that does is inside our little track menu here, we now have our track. And then we have these 2 kind of boxes. So if I come closer, and we can see a nice kind of like zoomed in version here, which is a really kind of handy window when we look at our track later on to see if it kind of moves out of place. So the first little cross is where we're going to be positioning our track, and we're going to make sure that is like on our point, to the center of our point as much as possible. This second area, we can then resize it by using this tiny little icon on the bottom right corner, and we can, choose the size, and we want to make sure that our point is inside this area. And then this second area is our search area. So as our footage moves and as our point moves, if it moves outside of this area in here, the search area will allow us and will allow the track to remain on the point. But if the footage moves so quick that the point goes out of our search area, then the track is going to break, and then we're going to have to make sure we do some manual stuff, which I'm hoping it does. So fingers crossed that it breaks. Cool. So inside our track menu, so as I said, we've got the name here, we've got the size, which is this first bit, and the search size is our second area. We then have this lock. So once we've done this track and we're moving on to like the second, third, fourth, you always want to make sure you lock it so we don't make some accidental changes while we're doing some of the other tracks. So we can just click that and it locks it. And then the other box here is this circle checkbox. And so at the moment it's a square. We're actually going to set it to a circle because our points are kind of circular. And I mean, I just drew these on with a pen. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to change this search area, make it a little bit smaller. And I am going to track this forwards. So another little tip, if you have something, so if I had the footage where it was appearing and then like disappearing, it's a good little tip to track from the middle of your timeline. So you track it back and you track it forwards. But because mine remains in shot the whole time, I can start on my first frame, which for me is 90, but normally would probably be 0. And I'm going to track it forwards. And the way that we do that is there's a little button here. So this is tracking forwards, this one here, and this is tracking backwards. And so I'm going to hit my track forwards. And that happened really quickly. Normally you have a little kind of like processing bar here, but that just happened super quick, which is cool. And now what we can do, we can scrub through my timeline and see how accurate our track is. So if we kind of come through, this is where I'm now looking to see if it jumps or if it turns red at all, just to make sure our track has worked. So we can come through, cool, right, it's gone red, that's good. It's not good, but it's good for me to show you what we have to do. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come back to the last point where it's accurate of its position. I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to double check. So yeah, so at 106, it goes red and is like, I can't find the point anymore. So on the last frame where it was in its right position, we're going to right click and insert a key at track position, and then it's going to quickly reprocess the next bit of the track. And so now we can see this purple line slightly changed, and now we can flick through and we can see that that's all good. Okay, cool, so it messes up again. So we can do the same thing, insert key at track position, and then we can just flick through and see if it messes up again, which it may do. So this is so the guys were saying about how the points, having them a suitable color based on the footage is important. So for me, because I was just kind of making this from scratch really quickly, I've got black markers, and because then I've got the grouting on my patio is also black, it has an issue sometimes when my hand goes past the black of the grout. It then thinks, oh, maybe that's the point. And so yeah, so that kind of will have an impact as well. Okay, cool. So because I'm kind of conscious of time, I'm not going to worry about the rest of the tracking, and I'm just going to open a file that has it all tracked, because I want to show you how we can get some 3D elements into it and make some fun stuff. So so all of these files are available, this entire thing, including the footage and the PNG sequence, are all kind of supplied, as well as the full C4D scene. So let me open up my motion track, and let's just pretend we've just really quickly tracked all 9 of those points. So I come into my motion tracker, we can now see all 9 of these points. And so I used just the exact same stuff that we just did. Some I needed to manually position. I then locked them all. And then now we have all of our tracked points here. Cool, right. So let me go back into my 2D so we can actually see this. So we'll play this through. We can see all of our points here are all now exactly where they need to be, and they're all being tracked. Cool, right. Step 1 done. We have our points tracked. So our motion tracking is done. Now we can add the object tracker. So if I grab my object tracker, now what we need to do is we need to assign our the points we have just tracked in our motion tracker to our object tracker. And so if I go to my motion tracker, I'm just going to highlight all of these points, because these are the points that are relating to this object here. So we could have multiple different objects, and you could right click, you can have a different folder with your different tracked points in, but because this is just the same object, all I need to do is just highlight all of these ones. Come back into our object tracker, and then inside this tracker tab, we have this assign selected. And what it's done is now it's assigned all of the tracks from my motion tracker to my object tracker. Cool. And one quick thing that I didn't say is inside my motion tracker, inside my 3D solve, it's very important to know the focal length and to set up the focal length of the footage that you're using. So for me, because I was using an iPhone, I didn't really know the focal length. I stuck it on a tripod and I measured from my iPhone to this kind of area here in my garden, and then across, and then from this area back to there. And then Jonas showed me a way of figuring out the angle and then the focal length. And then all I did was you come into the 3D solve. We changed this focal length to known and constant, because my phone doesn't move, so the focal length doesn't change at all. And then I typed in the angle, and then it gave me the equivalent focal length. So that's an important thing for when we are looking at motion tracking and object tracking. So with that bit done, and my tracks assigned, we can now go to our reconstruction and we can run our 3D solver for object, and it's going to run, if we see down the bottom left here, it's going to do that really quickly. And we now have all of our keys here, and we now have all of our nulls, which are representing our 9 individual points, as well as, if I go into model mode, this kind of tracked like movement here. And if we sort of scrub through, we can see how that follows that track there. And we're going to use this to then define some position and sort of like the plane at which our object is moving. And then we can add some 3D elements and it's going to follow it along. Sort of like a hologram or something, which is what I ended up doing. Cool. Okay, so we want to define the plane and the y-axis, and we can do that with constraints. So if I go into my object tracker, we have this little button down here, and if we click and hold it, we can create a planar constraint because we're going to define the plane, and we're going to define the y-axis. And so I'm going to select 3 of my points. So I'm going to select these 3 here, and now we can see we have this kind of green triangle and this green line, which is our y-axis. And the only other constraint I'm going to do is a vector constraint, and then this is going to be determining the size of the object that's in my hand that I'm going to turn into like the base of my hologram. So if I just click these 2, we can come into the vector constraint. Under length, if we set this to known, I know roughly this little thing here, the size of this thing, is roughly about 8 centimeters. So I can set that. And now we have sort of a bit more of like an accurate size for our object. Okay, cool. Right. So with all the kind of like technical, potentially time-consuming stuff out of the way, we can now get to adding some 3D elements into our scene, and we can align them now based on our object tracker, and they're going to move with our footage. And it's going to look like they've been there the whole time. So just to demonstrate it, I'm going to grab a disk, and I'm going to set this to something like 5.5. It's going to be nice and small. At the moment, we can't see it in our scene. We don't know where it's gone. But if we grab it, if we make it a child of our object tracker, because our object tracker is what's holding all of our information in now, and this lovely button up here that's reset transform, and if I hit that, it's going to now position it exactly at the center of where my object tracker is, and it's also going to animate along that object track kind of spline we had. And so we can now position this like, you know, a little better. And of course, a lot of this is going to then be like tweaking your hologram, tweaking your 3D geometry, and then, you know, bringing it into After Effects and perfecting it more. But, you know, this is sort of a little scratching the surface of how we can add some bits and bobs in cinema. And I'm also going to grab a sphere. And I'm just going to make that a child of my object tracker as well. And so now what should happen is my 3D elements are now working with my footage because we've object tracked that little object that was in the middle of my hand. And yeah, so all I then did was, if I come into here, so then I did was I created this kind of platform here. So if I actually play this through, so it's not the most professional of jobs, but I think it looks quite cool. And considering it's just footage taken in my garden and just with a bit of tracking, I think it looks okay. So yeah, all I made was this kind of this base here, which then covers the object that I had in my hand that I tracked. And then I created this hologram using just a normal FBX model, and then used a matrix and the redshift object tag to create the little kind of vertex spheres on here. And then yeah, just animated its position and its scale.
Very cool.
Something like that.
I love that you created a prop for this as well. It's great.
Unfortunately, that doesn't come in the project files, but hey,
That's-
it worked. It worked well.
This, and as Elly says, she's very kindly provided all these project files, including the original footage, so you can check out this technique. And it's really this one is about the process for how would you track something like this in cinema. So that's perfect for it. Plus, it's not very often we have somebody showing us a demonstration and saying that they hope it goes wrong. So,
Yeah. Well, if it goes well, then I can't show how to fix it.
that's kind of what we're here for, isn't it? To mess things up and show you what we would do if they messed up. That's
Yeah.
the key. Plus, also, that's fascinating, by the way, your method for calculating the focal length and that information about it, and then measuring that distance.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
I
really
wish I could explain
interested. What process did you use to then calculate that?
that. So it was actually with Jonas's help. There's like a focal length calculator, like mathematical equation on Google, and you just have to enter. Yeah, you enter like the distance of these kind of areas here, and then somehow it gives you the angle, and then then you enter that angle into Cinema 4D, and Cinema 4D gives you the equivalent focal length. So
Excellent.
I wish I could claim that I was smart enough to know that myself, but I don't.
So kids, this is why you need to pay attention at algebra class at school. That's really interesting. I might dig out the link to that and we'll put it on the description in the YouTube recording, because that's really interesting. And that's also a good pragmatic thing. If you're doing some shots, some test shots, or even these days, all sorts of different types of cameras are being used for production that don't necessarily store all that information. So that's a really useful kind of workaround. And we've had a couple of questions, Elly, about the YouTube tutorial that you mentioned that Jonas shared with you.
Yes.
So would you be able to type that into that question? A couple of people have asked for it, and then we'll also share that on the descriptions of the YouTube recording.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he goes into so much really cool stuff. So yeah, I'd recommend.
Plus, there's a whole playlist that Noseman has shared with me that I put into the chat about tracking in cinema. So I've shared that in the chat window too, along with some of the other links like the download link again. And also, Noseman was working hard in the background to find out where that hacker footage was from on ArtGrid. So we posted that link too.
Oh, sweet.
So what would we do without the internet? We'd go and connect to it. So a question from Erica, Elly. If parts of the footage cover the trackers, will the 3D object also get hidden behind that? Like if you wanted to have the hand cover part of it?
So that would be a case of like masking in After Effects. So you mean what if you wanted to kind of see like this bit here that obviously isn't like the best, like that bit there, it would be a case of masking in After Effects. But I just I created the glow so I didn't have to do that.
The TJ was also asking, and the simple answer is of course Roto. Hooray!
Yeah. If I had more time, I wanted to then like roto like my hand and remove my garden and put like an actual like FUI scene. But I didn't have all that time, unfortunately.
I mean, that's the other interesting thing about it, isn't it? The cross-reference of time, because there are perfect workflows for things, and there's the time in which you have to operate, because that's when it then leaves you and then goes off to live in the wide world. A bit like birds fleeing the nest. There's some sort of kind of equivalent in the VFX land, isn't there? A question also, Elly, from Emil. What about a tracking of objects that change shape?
So as in the object in the footage changes.
I think Emma is talking about a 3D object that changes shape, but that would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? If you're then having to track a prop that then moves.
Yeah, so the 3D object is fine because you'll be putting that in after the track. So you can do anything with 3D object afterwards. You could make it like bigger, smaller, and it will still be in the right perspective and orientation based on your track.
Emma's saying like a face, if you were tracking somebody's face to put something on, and then certainly, in fact, good old Spot Clone Tracker is excellent at in After Effects for doing quick versions of those. If people move their head, for example, and you want to attach a tattoo to them, or you want to just like mask over the fact that they've got tired eyes or something like that. But I think I must be referring into terms of how the face moves. Like, for example, the muscles are then changing. That would be an interesting track to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the behind the scenes of the stuff with like the Hulk, he's got like hundreds of points over his face, and then I guess they individually track all those different movements.
Yes, I know we were being very rude about tracking markers earlier on, but that's absolutely one of those times when they're essential. Cool, excellent. So thank you everyone for bearing with us as we inevitably overran. Shocker, I know. But let me share my screen because I just wanted to remind everyone, that anyone who joined late, that we do record all these sessions. So let's make me presenter and show you this window. So this is the place to go, the Maxon training team. And then we have links to all the various interesting online resources that we've been talking about. Just quickly checking if there are any last minute presentations. Oh, thank you everyone. Some great comments coming in about how much they enjoyed the session. So we appreciate that. Thank you. And the one quick thing, in case you missed the 10 minutes of, hey, look what we got coming up later at the beginning. But we have, if you go to the maxon.net page and you go to events, you can see all the amazing stuff we've got coming. But this very Thursday, just in a few days' time, this is something that would be really, really interesting to tune in for. So this is an entire hour on Ask the Trainer. And this is starring the great Noseman himself, Maxon Master Trainer, who is going to talk about with us how to make tutorials and the process of that. So that's really interesting. And I know I mentioned it before, but I wish I could go back in time and then say, okay, now making this would make it much, or rather knowing this would make it much less painful than it has been going through all those. Oh God, why did I forget to shut the window when I was recording the tutorial and so on? But it's also interesting about the philosophy of how often that you zoom in and where you should be positioning items so it's not confusing on the interface, and actually how to build a tutorial and rather than to deconstruct it and just make it obvious. So there's lots and lots of different aspects to this. So we'll be talking about that in general and talking about his recorded series, plus also how you can become certified as a Cinema 4D artist as well as a Cinema 4D trainer, and the ideas and the pragmatic steps to that, plus the philosophy behind it. So that would be a really interesting one. And I haven't mentioned this recently, but of course all these sessions are free. You don't need to pay for any of these because we just want to be sharing these with the community. So please feel free to jump on that, and it will be recorded as well. Excellent. So, and an extra thanks to you, Thanasis or Noseman, for skulking behind the scenes and finding all these links for us and answering some of the questions on the board. Great. So, in the grand history of, hey, one more thing, just to remind you to go back to the events page, because next Monday, in fact, we start off with a whole new set of Monday demystifying sessions on Redshift, and featuring materials and rendering, both with procedural and hair as well, plus the everydays thing we mentioned earlier on, where we, on the 4th week, attempt to create something from scratch in real time, in just an hour, maybe an hour and 2 minutes, maybe slightly overrun, who knows. That'll be the surprise at the end of that session. But I have to say thank you to Elly and to Chad and to Nick. Thank you for sharing so generously all your thoughts, ideas, and techniques for this month. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks
it was
for
a
having us,
blast.
Simon.
Yeah, it was super cool.
And there'll be a chance for us to get together again, because I believe that Elly may be joining you guys on the Hands-On with Maxon Particle series. So that'll be fun too.
Yes.
You haven't seen The Last of Us yet. Fantastic. So thank you again. Thanks for bearing with us as we slightly overrun. We really appreciate it. And please continue to send in your questions, training@maxon.net. And as we're proving, we listen to you. So it's, in fact, it's really, really essential, because it makes sure that we are providing or trying to provide the sort of things that are useful. Excellent. So we'll see you on the next one, or the next many of these things that we're running. But before then, see you around and take care.
See ya.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.